Alright, so recently on the channel, we of course talked about Aladdin for the Sega Genesis, a fine Disney film and a fine video game on both systems, but let's be real, the Sega Genesis version is the superior version. But what's interesting about, Disney and kind of just growing up in general is as you get older, you sort of fall out of interest with certain things. It's viewed not cool anymore or anything like that. And I remember like distinctly where that stopgap was for me, where I stopped, watching these sort of cartoon based movies and fell out of interest with them and wanted to see, more sort of teenager related stuff. And that movie for me was Toy Story. Toy Story was kind of the end of a traditional childhood for me. And I distinctly remember loving the movie and having some of the toys and stuff like that. But like, that was it. That was the final movie that I liked in that sort of style as a kid. And of course, because it was a 90s property, you had video games made on this. Now, the Genesis and the Super Nintendo versions of Toy Story are honestly pretty similar. There are some minor differences that make the Sega Genesis version better, and we'll get into them as we talk about this. But Toy Story, once again, is a game that I just really enjoyed. I really enjoyed it back then. I still enjoy it somewhat nowadays, but there are some problems with it. But I just want to talk about Toy Story because evidently we covered 90s Disney stuff on this channel now. Now, Toy Story, of course, is a film starring Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. Tom Hanks as Woody, Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear. And honestly, the parallels in the story of the game are actually very interesting to the parallels of like me, growing up, getting new things or getting rid of your old toys or putting them away or something like that. You always wonder, like, what if these things could feel stuff? Like they could feel that they are no longer being used and they're being discarded and stuff like that. Of course, Woody and Buzz don't really get along. Woody tries to set up Buzz. They end up becoming friends, so on and so forth. If you've never seen the first Toy Story film, I don't know, what are you doing with your life? Like, go watch it and go watch it twice. But within the game, I think they do a very good job of replicating, what was presented in the movie, and even taking a little bit of what, certain scenes from that movie and kind of expanding upon it and adding in some different gameplay styles. Now, the Sega Genesis version of the game, like I said, is the better version because it does have more content in it as far as the levels are concerned. The levels are all kind of different than one another. Some of them are like standard platforming. Some of them are like stealth missions, like when you and Buzz are at the arcade and you're like in a cup and you have to like hide whenever people are walking by so people don't see the cup moving. Like, I think the level design in this game is absolutely fantastic. There's even like a first person perspective mode where you have the little alien dudes and you got to put them in the claw machine and stuff like that. Like, it looks very good and almost makes you wonder like why nobody tried to do like a Doom on this, like why id Software never tried to do Doom on the Genesis when they did it on the Super Nintendo, because the Genesis was obviously capable of having a first person perspective engine on this. And yes, there was games like Zero Tolerance, but I feel like Toy Story actually looked like better and ran smoother than Zero Tolerance. But anyways, like the gameplay itself is good, but it's a very challenging game, I feel. And when you're a kid, you don't really want to mess around with stuff like that. I remember as a kid, like, it was very hard for me to get through this game. Like, even just like the first boss battle with Buzz Lightyear, you don't want to be around when my laser goes off. Like, first off, he sounds like Elvis.
You don't want to be in the way when my laser goes off.
And I never understood why he sounded like Elvis. But like, it's a pretty challenging game. And even just sometimes figuring out like what you have to do. Like, the first level of the game is not a traditional first level of a game, get from one point to another. You have to round up the toys and put them in the box. So like you're constantly trying to like whip them with your little string to make them walk in a certain way, and then you got to get to the end of it, and then there's like a thing you jump on that propels them into the toy chest. Like, there's lots of weird stuff like that, but I think that's what makes the game like really fun, because you always wanted to see what the next level was. Of course, as you proceed throughout the levels, there's like, driving. There's like a driving mission in the game. It's like, a top-down perspective, but then there's one where it's like a Mario Kart perspective. It's very impressive stuff, considering the hardware and considering the amount of variety. Now, do all the levels feel as quality as other levels in the game? not so much. I mean, there's definitely levels I'd enjoy, or I enjoyed more so than other levels. And like I said, the challenge is pretty high. And then considering this is like a kid's game, like, I don't know, I could see kids in the 90s getting frustrated, but you know, just use some Game Genie codes or something like that. As far as the presentation is concerned, I like it. You know, I think the graphics of the game, while a bit muted on the colors, like the animation itself is actually really, really good. I think it's very, very smooth, and all of the different gameplay styles are very well done in the game. You know, like I said, they all look really nice. I think the first person perspective and even the stealth level when you're at the arcade, I think those are like some of the standout levels, because you have like these polygonal walking characters of these legs that are like walking by you, and it gives you a real sense of like size and scope that I feel like they really nailed with this game. You know, control wise, it's all right. You know, the jumping can feel a little bit off sometimes. It can feel a little bit floaty. And then when you get into the whole fact that, you know, you are kind of on a limited life thing and a limited time meter and stuff like that with some of the different levels, like it can get a little bit frustrating. But I think overall, it's a really well done game. The audio in the game is, you know, based on Toy Story. You know, there's little voice samples too, like the aforementioned Buzz Lightyear sounding like Elvis. You don't want to be in the way when my laser goes off. Brett, look that up. It's the first level. It's the first level. I want a clip of that in here.
You don't want to be in the way when my laser goes off.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy this game. The Sega Genesis version has a bit more content than the Super Nintendo version does, in my opinion, because of the fact that you get these different sorts of levels and stuff like that, and some of them are not present in the Super Nintendo version, and some of them just don't look as good as they do in the Sega Genesis version, which is actually pretty interesting, because usually it's the other way around. But I love Toy Story. I think it's a super fun game, a super nostalgic game, and it's really a game that, you know, it kind of signified the end of an era for me as a kid. You know, it was kind of becoming a teenager moment. You know, you're moving on from all your kiddie stuff, and I wish I would have held on to a lot of that stuff. I wish I would have held on to like my toys and stuff like that. But, you know, it's a growing up process. You don't know where you're going next. You don't know what's going to happen next. And you don't want to be like left behind with what all the cool kids are doing and stuff like that. So definitely a movie I'm very fond. I remember, I'll tell this one little story. It's the weirdest story in the world. I had a Buzz Lightyear and my cousin had a Woody action figure. And I remember we were at my grandma's house and we put them, because we thought, oh, maybe the toys are alive. We put them in the living room, and then somehow like they ended up on the porch, and we never figured it out, like what happened. I'm sure somebody just moved it because they didn't want it to be in the living room, and they just wanted, you know, it out of the way, so they put it on the porch so that we would eventually find them. But you know, just kind of stuff like that, like you always remember it. You always remember stuff like that. So let me know in the comment section down below, do you have any memories of Toy Story? Specifically the Genesis version, because the Genesis version is the superior version. Look, you're not going to get many Super Nintendo games on this show. You'll get some, but a lot of Super Nintendo games just completely missed me. So just deal with it. And as always, guys, thank you for visiting my stash. Make sure you check out other episodes that you might have missed out on. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.